The Dowager Duchess of Ansford said it in the long gallery at Wayland, under the portrait of the 4th Duke, with 11 people standing near enough to hear and a 12th coming through the door behind her. She is beneath this house. She did not lower her voice. That was rather the object. Augusta Danvers had spent 40 years learning exactly how loudly a thing must be said to be heard by the person it concerns, while remaining, technically, a remark made to a friend, and she had never in her life misjudged it. Clara Rushmere, coming in from the south corridor with her gloves still on, heard the whole of it. She did not stop walking. She crossed the gallery at the pace of a woman with somewhere to be, and she inclined her head to the dowager as she passed, correctly, at the depth owed by a betrothed woman not yet married into the family, and she said, "Ma'am," and she went on through to the library, and the door closed behind her with no particular sound at all. Somebody laughed. The gallery went on with its afternoon, and Clara Rushmere stood on the other side of that door, with her back against it, and her gloves still on, looking up the length of the library at 11,000 books she had never counted and did not need to, because the inventory had been made in 1798 and was in a japanned box in a solicitor's office in Manchester, and every volume in that room was listed in it. And so was the portrait of the 4th Duke, and so was the gallery, and so was the house. She had known for 4 years. She had not told the man she was going to marry, and she was beginning to understand that this had been a mistake and that it was going to cost her more than she had budgeted for. Wayland had not belonged to the Danvers family since the 22nd of June, 1798. That was the fact, and it was a very quiet fact, and it had been kept quiet for 19 years by the simple method that keeps most large facts quiet, which is that nobody with an interest in mentioning it has ever been in the room with anybody who would care. The 5th Duke of Ansford, Nicholas's grandfather, had lost the estate at cards over 11 months in 1797. Not dramatically. In pieces, the way a man loses a thing he cannot stop doing. The Yorkshire property first, then the London house, then the timber, then the tenanted farms, and at the last the hall itself with everything in it, down to the plate and the pictures, and the 4th Duke on the gallery wall. It was bought, the whole of it, in one transaction, at a price that was fair and no better, by a cotton spinner from Ancoats named Josiah Rushmere, who had begun in a cellar with 2 frames and finished with 4 mills and a great deal of money and no interest whatever in living in Hertfordshire. And Josiah Rushmere, having bought a duke's house, did the single most extraordinary thing anybody in that story ever did. He left them in it. No rent, no lease. A letter, 1 page, in his own hand, saying that the family might remain at Wayland during his life and his heirs at his heirs' pleasure, that he asked nothing, and that he would take it as a kindness if the matter were not spoken of. He never came to see it. He never once, in 22 years, set foot in the house he owned. Clara had asked her grandfather why, when she was 19 and had found the japanned box, and Josiah Rushmere, 81 and mostly deaf and entirely clear, had said, "Because his lad was 14. And because I have been the man in the room when they carry the furniture out, and I would not do it to a child." Nicholas Danvers, 9th Duke of Ansford, did not know any of it. He was 34. He had been a duke for 6 years, and had run Wayland for those 6 years the way a conscientious man runs a thing he believes he owns. He had drained the low meadows, and rebuilt 11 cottages, and put a new roof on the church, and argued with his mother about the cost of every one of them. He had met Clara Rushmere at a subscription concert in Manchester in the spring of 1815, where he had gone on business connected with a canal, and she had gone because she liked music, and he had spent the whole of the second half being systematically dismantled on the subject of Haydn by a woman in grey who did not know who he was and did not moderate a single opinion when she found out. He had proposed 14 months later. She had said yes, and then she had said, "You should know what my grandfather was," and he had said, I know exactly what your grandfather was, and I have seen his mills, and I would rather have built those than half of what my family has ever built. And Clara Rushmere had been in love with him from approximately that sentence onward, and had never seen any reason to pretend otherwise. She had not told him about the deed that night. She had told herself she would tell him within the month. That had been in June. It was now March. The Dowager Duchess had opened her campaign in November and had conducted it, by March, with real distinction. There was nothing so crude as an insult. Augusta Danvers had insulted precisely one person in 40 years and had done it that afternoon in the gallery, deliberately, having decided that the situation now warranted it. Everything before had been administration. Clara was seated at every Wayland dinner below the wife of a baronet, which was correct, and which meant that for 4 months she had watched her intended husband at 40 feet. Her name was omitted from the visiting lists that went out under the Dowager's hand and appeared always in the second post in a separate note, in a way that made every hostess in the county aware there had been a discussion. The bells were not rung for her. She was given the Chinese bedroom, which was cold and which was not offered a fire until the 3rd week, and when she mentioned it once. Mildly, to a housemaid, the Dowager expressed such extravagant horror at the oversight, in front of 11 guests, that Clara had not mentioned anything again. And in February the Dowager had begun to talk, quite kindly, about the difficulty. It is not the money, my dear, whatever people say. Nobody minds money now. It is that a duchess is looked at, and everything she does is looked at. And a woman who has not been raised to it does not know which of the things she is doing are being looked at until she has already done them. A pat on the hand. I would not have you humiliated. That is all it is. I would not have you find out in a room full of people. It was very well done. It was so well done that Clara had, on 2 separate nights in February, sat on the edge of the Chinese bed at 2 in the morning and seriously considered whether the woman might be right. That was the part she never told anybody afterward. Not the gallery, the 2 nights. Because the Dowager was not entirely wrong, and that was the poison in it. Clara Rushmere had been raised in a good house in Ardwick by a grandfather who ate at 6 and read his own ledgers. And she did not know the things a duchess is supposed to know without being told. She did not know that one does not thank a footman by name. She did not know that the second dinner bell means something different from the first. She had learnt 11 of these in 4 months, each one from the particular silence that follows an error. And each silence had been arranged by a woman who could have simply told her in a sentence and had chosen, every single time, not to. That was the cruelty, and it was invisible, and it would have looked like patience to anybody watching. There was one afternoon in January when Clara had come down to find the whole party gone out riding, having been told at breakfast. She had been at that breakfast, in a form of words that had not sounded like an invitation and had been one. She had stood in the empty hall for some minutes. Then she had gone up to the muniment room, which nobody used, and sat among the estate papers of a house she owned, and worked, for 2 hours, on the Ancoats accounts her grandfather's manager sent down every quarter. It was the only room at Wayland in which she was ever entirely comfortable, and she did not for a moment miss the irony of it. She could have ended it at any moment in 4 months with 11 words. That was the thing that sat in her like a stone. She could have said, at any of those dinners, from the seat below the baronet's wife, I own this house. She could have said it and watched it land, and it would have been the single most satisfying sentence of her life, and she would have been paying for it in one form or another until she died. Because the moment she said it, Nicholas Danvers had not chosen a woman. He had been bought a wife by her grandfather 19 years after the fact, and every person in Hertfordshire would say so, and this was the sentence she could not get past. At 2 in the morning, in a cold room, he would eventually wonder himself. I did not come here to win, she thought. I came here to be married. Those are not the same thing, and the moment I use that box, they stop being the same thing forever. So she said nothing. For 4 months she said nothing, and the county decided she was proud, and then that she was dull, and finally that she was stupid, which she found the most restful of the three. The dowager's second move came in the first week of March, and it was not administration. And it very nearly worked. She wrote to Manchester, not to Clara's family, to a man named Peel Hurst, who had been Josiah Rushmere's junior partner for 11 years and had left the firm in 1809 after a disagreement about a patent, and who had spent the 8 years since telling anybody who would listen that old Rushmere had cheated him. Augusta Danvers had found him the way such men are always found, which is by asking a solicitor whether anybody dislikes the family, and Peel Hurst came south in the second week of March and was given a bedroom at Wayland considerably warmer than the Chinese one. He had a story. The story was that Josiah Rushmere's fortune had been built on a machine he had not invented, that there was a man in Ancoats who had died poor because of it, and that the Rushmere money, the money that was about to become Danvers' money, was, in the plain sense, stolen. It was not true. It was, however, arguable, and it had a date and a name in it, and Peel Hurst told it well at the Wayland dinner table on the 11th of March to 14 people. Clara sat below the baronet's wife and listened to a man she had known since she was 6 years old explain to a Hertfordshire dining room that her grandfather had been a thief. She put down her fork. She waited until he had entirely finished, because she had learnt, at Ancoats and elsewhere, that a man's story is never so weak as in the 4 seconds after he stops telling it. "Mr. Hurst," she said. The patent was filed in 1791 in the name of Josiah Rushmere and Thomas Ardley jointly. It is in the register at the Patent Office, and any man in this room may send for a copy for 4 shillings and 6pence. Thomas Ardley died in 1804, and his widow received 200 a year from my grandfather until she died in 1813, and after that his daughter received it, and she is receiving it now. And I sign the order myself every quarter, because my grandfather is dead, and it is my hand on it. The table had gone extremely quiet. "You are welcome to write to her," Clara said. "I will give you the direction. Her name is Mrs. Ellen Tarrant of Salford, and I would ask you all to notice, before you do, that Mr. Hurst has been telling this story for 8 years and has never once written to the woman it is supposedly about. Nicholas Danvers, 40 feet away at the head of his own table, was on his feet. Mr. Hurst will be leaving Wayland tonight," he said, "and I would like to know who invited him." And Augusta Danvers said, "Without a flicker, I did, my dear. I thought it as well that we should hear it from a friend rather than from a newspaper. I am glad to be corrected." And she smiled at Clara down the length of the table with what any observer would have sworn was warmth. "You see how it is done, my dear." That was very well answered. It was, Clara thought, sitting back down below the baronet's wife, the most complete defeat she had suffered in 4 months, because she had won. She had taken the man's story apart in 90 seconds, with a patent number and a widow's name, and every person at that table had watched her do it. And the dowager had reached out and picked the victory up off the cloth and put it in her own pocket before it had finished cooling. That was very well answered. As though Clara had performed a recitation, as though the whole evening had been arranged for her instruction, which, and this was the part that kept her awake, it now was, because Augusta Danvers had said so out loud, and nobody in that room would ever remember it any other way. She understood, somewhere around the fish, that she was not being fought. She was being managed, the way one manages a horse in an unfamiliar yard, and that a woman who is being managed cannot object without proving the necessity of it. He came to the Chinese bedroom corridor at midnight, which was improper, and stood 8 feet away from her door, which was his compromise with propriety, and said, "How long have you been sitting below Lady Fenn?" 4 months. How cold is that room? Very. Clara had her shawl round her. The fire has been lit since the 3rd week. It smokes. I have not mentioned it, because the last time I mentioned anything your mother was so distressed on my behalf in front of 11 people that a housemaid was nearly turned off for it. And I have found it is cheaper to be cold. Nicholas put his hand over his eyes. I have been sitting at the head of that table for 4 months. You have been sitting at the head of that table, wondering why I seemed dull, said Clara, and it was the first unkind thing she had said to him in 14 months, and she watched it go into him. I am sorry. That was true, and I should not have said it tonight. Say the rest of it. There is no rest of it. Your mother has not done one thing I can name in a sentence. That is the entire method. If I stand in your library and list it, the seating, the lists, the bedroom, the bells, I sound like a woman who is offended about bells. She pulled the shawl tighter. There is nothing to fight. That is what she has built. It is quite beautiful, in its way. I have been 4 months finding it and I cannot get a grip anywhere. He was quiet a long moment. There is something you are not telling me, he said. And Clara Rushmere, standing in a cold corridor at midnight 8 feet from the man she was going to marry, said, yes, and then, not tonight. I am going to tell you, and it is going to be the worst hour of your life, and I am not going to hand it to you at midnight in a passage. She never got the chance, because the Dowager Duchess of Ansford had known about the deed since 1798, and had been waiting 19 years for somebody to make her say so. She had been 26 that year. She had stood in the hall at Wayland while the inventory was taken, and had watched a clerk from Manchester write down the 4th Duke, oil on canvas, gallery, and she had gone upstairs afterward and been sick, and her husband had never spoken of it again in 22 years of marriage, and neither had she. She had raised 2 sons in a house that was not theirs and had told neither of them, and in March of 1817, her elder son had brought home a Rushmere. She went to the japanned box first, not Clara's, her own, the one in the muniment room at Wayland with the letter in it, and she found what she had known she would find, which was 1 page in a cellar-bred hand saying during my life and my heirs, at my heir's pleasure. At my heir's pleasure, and Josiah Rushmere's heir was going to sleep in the Chinese bedroom. She moved on the 15th of March at the betrothal dinner in front of 31 people, and it was the single boldest thing Augusta Danvers ever did in her life. She rose to speak, which a dowager may do, and she said that she had a duty to the family and to her son, and would be forgiven if she performed it badly. And then she said, there is a paper at Wayland that my son has never seen, and I have carried it for 19 years, and I have decided tonight that I would rather be thought a monster than let this marriage be made in ignorance. Miss Rushmere's grandfather bought this house in 1798. It is hers, every stone of it, and the pictures and the books and the ground under this table. My son does not own the chair he is sitting in, and he has not known it for 1 hour of his life, and she has known it since before he asked her. She let it stand, quite still, in a silent room. I am 71 years old and I have no interest left in being liked. I only ask the room to consider what it means that a woman should let a man propose to her without telling him whose house he was standing in when he did it. There is no describing the noise that 31 people make when they stop making any. Nicholas Danvers did not move at all. That was what Clara looked at, not the room, not his mother. Him, his hands, flat on the cloth on either side of his plate. Is it true? He said. Clara Rushmere stood up. Yes, she said. All of it. And I would like to say the rest before anybody leaves this room, if you will let me, because your mother has told you the true things in the order that does the most harm, and there is another order. Your grandfather lost this house at cards in 1797, and mine bought it in 1798, and mine let yours stay in it, rent-free, forever. and asked one thing, which was that it never be spoken of. That letter is in your muniment room. It has been in your muniment room for 19 years. I found the papers when I was 19. I asked my grandfather why a man buys a house and does not live in it, and he told me that the Duke's boy was 14 years old, and that he had been in the room when the furniture goes out and would not do it to a child. That boy was your father. I did not tell you in June. I have not told you in 9 months. That is the thing I did wrong, and I am not going to argue about it, because I have lain awake about it a great deal, and there is no version where I come out of it well. But I will tell you why, and then you may decide. Because from the moment you know, you have not chosen me. My grandfather bought you, and it happened when you were 15, and neither of us was in the room. Everybody in Hertfordshire will say so by Tuesday. And in 11 years, in the middle of some quarrel about a drain, you would have wondered, and I would have known you were wondering, and I would rather have been cold in the Chinese bedroom for the rest of my life. She turned then to the Dowager Duchess of Ansford, and she did not raise her voice, and 31 people afterwards said the same thing about it, which was that she had sounded almost gentle. Ma'am, you have carried this alone since you were 26 years old, and I do not think anybody in this room has any idea what that has cost you. I have been in this house 4 months, and I have been unable to breathe in it. You have had 19 years. You said in the gallery that I am beneath this house. I have thought about that sentence more than you would believe. I am not going to argue with it. I am going to say only that I have known since I was 19 that you were living in my grandfather's house, and I have never once let anybody say so in front of you, including tonight, until you said it yourself. That is the whole difference between us, ma'am, and it is not birth. 31 people went home that night with the story, and by the Tuesday it was in 4 counties, and it did not come out the way the Dowager had intended in any single particular. She had expected the county to be scandalized at a woman who had let a duke propose in ignorance. The county was scandalized for about a day and a half. Then it discovered the 5th duke at cards in 1797, which nobody under 50 had ever heard, and after that nothing else in the story stood a chance, because a family that had lost a great house at whist and kept it quiet for 19 years while sitting in judgment on a cotton spinner's granddaughter was a very much better subject for a Hertfordshire drawing room than anything Clara Rushmere had done or failed to do. Augusta Danvers had thought she was firing on the marriage. She had, in fact, opened the only cupboard in Wayland that mattered, and she had opened it herself, in front of 31 witnesses, and could not now be said to have been forced to it by anybody. Her son did not speak to her for 11 months. He did not speak to Clara for 6 days. She did not go home to Manchester, which everybody expected. She went to the vicarage at Wayland Parva and stayed with the vicar's sister, 400 yards outside her own park gate, and answered no letters, and walked every afternoon, and was seen by half the parish. She said afterward that she stayed because leaving would have been an answer, and she did not have one to give yet. On the 2nd day the Dowager Duchess came to the vicarage, which nobody expected either. She did not apologize. She sat down in a room considerably smaller than any she had sat in for 50 years and said, "You did not tell them my husband knew." "No, ma'am." "Why?" "Because he is dead and cannot answer, and because you would have had to live in the county with it." Clara poured the tea herself, there being nobody else to, and because it was not necessary. I only needed the true order of events. I did not need every true thing in it. Augusta Danvers looked at her for a long time. "I have been afraid of a knock at that door since I was 26 years old," she said. "Every carriage on that drive for 19 years. I made myself the most correct woman in Hertfordshire, because a woman who is perfectly correct is not asked questions, and I have not had a single hour in that house that was not arranged around it." Her hands were not entirely steady on the cup. "Do you know what I did on the day the inventory was taken?" I put my own jewellery in a bag and walked it down to the vicarage, because I did not know whether they would count it, and I could not bear to ask. It sat in that vicarage for 4 months. I am sitting in the room it sat in. She looked round it, once, briefly, and then my son brought home the knock at the door. Yes, you will not believe this, and I shall say at once. It was never the Mills. She set the cup down. I would have been exactly as frightened of a Marcus's daughter. It was that you were the one person alive who could say it. He came on the 6th day, on foot, across the park, and found her at the vicarage gate. I have been in the muniment room since Tuesday, said Nicholas Danvers. I have read every paper in it. I have read your grandfather's letter 40 times, and I want to tell you what I have concluded, and then I want to ask you something, and I have got them in that order deliberately. My grandfather ruined this family, and my father knew, and my mother knew, and they let me grow up believing I was the 9th Duke of Ansford of Wayland, when I have been a guest in another family's house since before I could walk. 6 years I have been draining those meadows. I have been improving your property, Clara, and being rather pleased with myself about it, and that is the most ridiculous thing that has ever happened to a man, and I have got to be allowed to say it out loud once. You have said it. I have. He did not smile. Here is what I have concluded. Your grandfather bought a house and gave it back in everything but the paper to a family he had never met, because of a boy of 14, and he asked one thing, which was silence, and he was given 19 years of it, and in the whole of those 19 years, not one person in my family ever wrote to thank him. Not once. I have looked. He would not have wanted. I do not care what he would have wanted. He was owed it. Nicholas's voice cracked, the first time she had ever heard it. I have spent 6 days waiting to feel humiliated, and it will not come. What comes instead is that a man in Ancoats did a thing that nobody made him do, and my family took it for 19 years and called it their own flaw. He took his hat off, which he did not need to do at a gate. Clara, I am not going to ask you to marry me in that house. I would not know how to ask it now, and you would not know how to hear it. So I am asking you at a vicarage gate on a public road with the whole parish able to see, and I am asking for exactly one thing that is not the house, and not the money, and not the deed. Marry me, and let me be the one who is grateful. My family has had 19 years of being given something and pretending it was theirs. I would like to be the first one who says thank you out loud and goes on saying it. Clara Rushmere put her hand on the gate. That is a considerably better proposal than the first one, she said. The first one was in a garden and I had a speech. I know, I could hear the speech. She was crying and entirely composed, which she managed all her life and nobody ever understood. Yes, they were married in June at Wayland Parva, in the small church with the new roof he had paid for out of his own income. And the parish came, and the county came, and every soul in it knew the whole of the story by then, because the county had known within a week. The deed was not transferred. Clara refused it flatly, and went on refusing it for the rest of her life. And it remains in the Rushmere name, held now by a great-granddaughter, and Wayland has never legally belonged to the Danvers family since the 22nd of June, 1798. Nicholas paid rent. 400 a year into the Ancoats charity his wife established for the widows of the Mills, and the first payment was made in the September of 1817, and the arrangement is still running. He said, when the county asked, that a man ought to know what he is standing on. The Dowager Duchess of Ansford lived 11 more years and did not leave Wayland, which had been Clara's condition and which she had insisted on in the face of considerable argument from her own family in Manchester. They were never affectionate. That would have been a lie, and neither woman was capable of it. But in the second winter the old woman came into the long gallery where Clara was standing under the portrait of the 4th Duke, and stood beside her, and said, He was a fool and a boor, and he beat a groom to death in 1741, and nobody in this family will tell you that. You have just told me. Yes, said Augusta Danvers. I have found I would rather somebody knew, and she went out, and that was in 11 years, as close as the two of them ever came to it, and Clara Rushmere counted it as enough. The portrait hangs there still. It hung on Josiah Rushmere's inventory in 1798, item 409, 4th Duke, oil on canvas, gallery, and it hung on Clara's when she made her own in 1820, and it hangs on her great-granddaughter's now. And it has never once in 200 years belonged to the family whose face it is. There is a small brass plate under it. Clara had it put up in 1831, the year after the dowager died, and the county thought it eccentric, and then stopped noticing, the way the county always does. It does not give the 4th Duke's name. It says, this house was bought in 1798 by Josiah Rushmere of Ancoats, cotton spinner, who did not put the family out. Wayland remembers it. Her husband read it the day it went up and stood in front of it a long while with his hat in his hand. He never once came to see it, Nicholas said. No, his wife took his arm. He said there was nothing here he wanted. Was he right? Very nearly, said Clara Danvers, Duchess of Ansford, who had been called beneath that house in that gallery, under that picture, and had said nothing at all, because she had not needed to. He was out by 1,